seated. Well, how about that gospel, huh? I call the passage personally the dishonorable story. And I want to be up front with you. I don't get it. I don't understand fully this passage. And honestly, I'm in good company. The general consensus from all the theologians, scholars, and preachers that I've read concludes that nobody really understands what this parable means. Yeah, there's theories, guesses, some interesting lines and thoughts here and there, but what it boils down to is the passage is a difficult one, and no one knows for certain why Jesus told this particular parable, except for Jesus himself. As far as I know, he's never told anyone the complete answer. Looking at the story, it appears that a rather unscrupulous manager makes a desperate attempt to save his own hide. And the fact that it works, that the story ends in surprise, that's not the shocking part. I mean, Jesus does that all the time, a surprising end of the story. Only this time it's really unsatisfying. I cannot imagine that many of us enjoy hearing of a scoundrel who really seems to do nothing good, not repentant in any way, shape, or form, somehow receives approval from Jesus. This, I think, is the same good feeling story that a lot of other ones done, like the one that just came before it, the prodigal son story. I wonder how early followers of Jesus heard this story. I mean, usually we can tell by what follows the parable what they thought of it. Remember, that's the way gospel writing works. Jesus told the parables in his lifetime, and then a gospel writer took the established story, placed it in their narrative, and then comments on it, making sense of it for his current audience and the ones that will follow. They have Jesus explain the parables, which means the gospel writers tell us what they believe Jesus meant by putting it in Jesus' words. So you see, the parable likely ended with these words. His master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. That's the end of the story. Everything else is commentary. And most people believe that, at least publicly, Jesus did not explain his parables. Luke starts sharing what he believes Jesus means. But I get the sense that Luke doesn't really know. Because he starts with, the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light, which doesn't really explain anything. I mean, gospel writers always put in Jesus' words, their own. They're just trying to make sense of it. It's not meant to be deceptive. That is the literary acceptable technique of the account of someone's life in the first century. But he goes on because he knows what he's written isn't enough yet. He says, "And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it's gone, they may welcome you into eternal homes." That at least fits the story, even if it's not particularly satisfying. But then Luke says, "Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much. Whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. Have you not been faithful with dishonest wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Have you not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what your own?" You get the sense that Luke just throwing stuff at the wall, hoping something sticks. Maybe something will make sense of this. Because, honestly, I think the truth is Luke didn't like the story either. But to his credit, he includes it. All the other gospel writers, they ignored the story. It's not found anywhere else except for the Gospel of Luke. It's sort of like that Syrophoenician woman story when Jesus calls her a dog. Doesn't look good for Jesus. But Mark still tells it. Why? Because it likely happened. Then Luke tries another technique. This is a tried and true one. He takes Jesus' words from somewhere else and places them at the end of the story. So stuff that makes sense, like no slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. And then, the kicker, you cannot serve God and wealth. These likely come from Matthew's Sermon on the Mount and are also found in the Gospel of Thomas. So he's taken these general statements, applied it here as if to somehow make some sense of this strange, unexplainable story. Now, I think it's good that we have this strange, unexplainable story because it is a good reminder that Jesus challenged people who were listening to him. It wasn't straightforward, do this, don't do that. He wanted people engaged in life and to be engaged in the complexities of life, because there often isn't a simple answer. I would be skeptical of anyone who tells you that they know the one and only meaning of a parable of Jesus. Anyone who insists this is the right way to understand Jesus might just be more unsure than you realize. So I am going to offer some thoughts over what I think the story might be about, but you can believe me or not. Who's the parable aimed at? Think about it. Who are the managers of this time? It's likely the religious leaders that were just discussed in the story that came before. I mentioned last week that the parable of the prodigal son and the forgiving father finishes with the elder sibling who's furious about the party that's now being held for his delinquent paying the brother who squandered everything and now is getting something he doesn't deserve. And that the father's urging to him is, come back to the party. Come back into being a joy for others. Maybe, just maybe, this story is aimed towards the religious leaders as to how they might begin that process. After all, whoever the rich man is, it could be God, it could be Jesus, it could even be the Romans. I mean, the rich man doesn't have to be good. But the rich man finds out that this manager is doing a poor job and has a bad reputation. You can't work for me any longer. Give me your accountings so I can get rid of you. So the manager is about to be out of a job. And out of a job means out of life. What's he going to do? Well, he goes out and makes some deals that go outside the lines, cutting the amount that people owe his master. And it's almost in a conspiratorial sort of nature. How much do you owe? You owe 100? Quick, make it 50. How about you? You owe 80? Let's make it 60. Now, mind you, there's a good chance that people who owe these large amounts couldn't pay it back. But maybe they could pay this portion. Or maybe they said, well, hey, if I'm getting a deal, I'm going to do it. Now we understand that the manager's actions are self-serving. He hopes to do one of two things. Either produce favor in those who are getting a deal, or potentially make the rich man look really bad if he suddenly sacks the manager. Hey, did you hear? He sacked the manager that cut us that deal. What's that about? What a, And then, the surprise of all surprise, the rich man sees the value in what the manager has done. And then comes the big line at the end, commending the manager for shrewdness. Personally, I've always heard word shrewdness as a negative thing. And its archaic meanings means malicious, bad, and shrewish. But I think the real meaning here in this context is astute or sharp in practical manners, marked by cleverness and perceptiveness. You know, it's ironic. In a moment of panic, the manager accused of squandering property, doing a terrible job, all of a sudden becomes a good manager. He starts building relationship with people. He forgives some debt, getting some return from the one he represents, and not personally getting money in return. By practically using what talents he has, he actually serves everybody. And the rich man sees potential in this manager. Maybe that's the message for the religious leaders who oppose Jesus. You still have an opportunity. Forget about the accounting of the past. Do what you're good at, what you do well. Conduct yourself in a way that reflects that your relationships with others actually matters. And even if your motivation is initially self-serving, maybe, just maybe, you can find a path to serve. And once you're on the path of serving, there's the possibility of transformation. Now, perhaps some of this speaks to you, and maybe you're not satisfied with this text. That's fine. In fact, the really good news in all of this is that when it comes to the gospel, when it comes to the teachings of Jesus, all is not settled. The story isn't over. This parable, like all of Jesus' parables, is not some bitter pill to simply swallow and wait for a passive effect. I believe that Jesus told these parables in part because there's no simple answer that works for life for all time. And that parables constantly require our reflection and revision and our new understanding in the context of our lives and shared lives with others. Your thoughts on the story matters. Your understanding of the parable may be challenged not just by reading it again, but by hearing the thoughts of others. So that's where I'm at. But this story is yours to wrestle with as well. What do you hear in this